Hello, and welcome to Around the Verse, our weekly look at the development of Star Citizen. I'm Eric Kyron Davis, Senior Producer.
And I'm Steve Bender, Animation Director over here at CIG. So Eric, I heard you'll be on a WonderCon panel this Saturday?
Yeah, I'll be joining narrative designer Chris Avalone, author Janice Davis, screenwriter Adam G. Simon, and composer Sean Pack to discuss how to make a career as a creative professional.
Well, very cool. And that's for WonderCon attendees?
Yes, if you have a badge, you can attend. And I'd love to see anyone who can make it there on Saturday. Event details can be found online in your WonderCon program.
Awesome. Well, we have a great episode today. To celebrate its reveal in the 262 patch, we can finally share part 2 of the ship pipeline video that follows the completion of the Drake Buccaneer.
But first, let's go to Brian Chambers in Germany for their studio update.
Hi everyone, I am Brian Chambers, the development director here at Foundry 42 Frankfurt. We started Foundry 42 Frankfurt a little over 2 years ago with 6 employees. This past month, we just signed our 7th member of the team, 7-0. We've come a long way in a short time from an office mostly filled with empty desks to now an almost full office working across most all disciplines. This past month has been busy as usual. At one point, we had, I believe, 15 visitors here from other offices working across various disciplines. We occasionally travel to the other offices to meet and discuss future plans, review progress in certain areas, kick off large tasks, etc. So let's jump right into it, see what the team's been working on over the past few weeks. Starting off with the weapons team, the FPS weapon artist finished a second art pass on the Klaus and Werner Arclight 2, the Gallant, and the Arrowhead. These now include new venting mechanisms which add much more visual interest when you're doing things such as reloads and so on. They also completed the first art pass on the Kastak Arms Ravager 212 and a second art pass on the Kastak Arms Devastator with an additional layer of detail. For the ship weapons, we completed all the rockets and rocket pods, ranging from size 1 all the way to 3, as well as the first art pass for the Knightsbridge Arms ballistic cannons. We can now use those various sizes to test out the new modularity system and various upgrade levels and combinations to see what we can come up with. In the office here in Frankfurt, we recently hired a lead lighting artist to work with our global lighting team. One of his first tasks was modular surface outpost and determining how we'll integrate lighting in such a way that it feels coherent across potentially countless permutations of the outpost layout. Every single room could have a different arrangement of props and objects, which then dictates where lights would logically be placed, as well as the specific theme or mood for that room that we're after. For example, crew sleeping quarters need to have a different mood than a hydroponics lab, etc. Our first step, though, is to integrate simple lighting variations into the procedural system so we can discover and solve any issues that may arise, such as light leaking through walls or certain lighting variations looking incorrect when placed next to each other and so on. Really see what conflicts. At the same time, these technical challenges, we're also focusing on creating a visual target for our main room types: habitation, hydroponics, engineering, storage. See how far we can push the lighting to match our concepts and goals for the interior look of our surface outposts. When these are finished, we can then determine how to break the lighting down into modular components that can then be fed all the way back into the procedural system and be applied to all the other procedural bits we have. The tech art team here in Frankfurt worked on multiple skinning tasks this month, including clothing for both the PU and Squadron 42 to widen the range of customer character customization, and a skinning pass on the final Van Duel mesh so the animators can work across on their animations. They worked on a tool for the animators to redirect their walking animations to turn animations. It's a fairly simple tool, but ultimately it'll reduce the time that the animators need to spend on creating those specific animations. In a sense, it allows us to reuse and recycle. They also created a tool to allow the team to quickly update the exact grip placements of individual weapons. Artists can now use a reference mesh, create an offset, hit export, and immediately see the changes live in Engine. This thing makes things much more efficient, allows them to iterate much more quicker than they did before. The level design team here in Frankfurt's busy working on the modularity of space stations and surface outposts, as seen in a recent ATV episode. As an initial proof of concept, we have 5 versions of the outposts that we're moving forward with. In the future, we'll be able to create a large number of outposts with different layouts and purpose, but as an initial step, we focus on just a few to ensure that the systems, props, placement of planets, blah, 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 all working together as we intend. The truck stop is our first test of modularity in space stations. We've been working on customizable hubs to be able to create variations using add-ons and procedural plot placement to add flavor to various rooms. The modularity of space stations also extends to how the rooms connect to one another following pre-made flowcharts. We're currently working with engineers to get it functioning in-game and get it all going the way we actually intend it to be. The system design team has been continuing their work on the usable system, as we've also recently discussed. They've also been working with the cinematics team and helping to establish the final look and feel that we'll have for the conversation system, and the progress is going good. For the engine team, we generally discuss what they've been doing for the procedural tech, and they've continued to make great progress there. But I thought I'd dig a little bit deeper into a couple areas this month. So yeah, here goes. We finally finished the physics grid refactoring, which is used to store each individual physical object in the world and to allow for fast neighbor queries, such as give me all the objects within 10 meters. And it has all the bells and whistles now active. The old legacy cryphysics grid system worked by projecting the entire world onto a fixed 2D array of cells of uniform dimension. For memory reasons, the old system was configured to huge cell sizes to allow for our massive worlds, which led to severe performance problems when dealing with lots of small objects, as well as lots of entities returned due to the fact that the grid would wrap around every few thousand kilometers. To address these issues, the new grid system was designed to have a sparse and fixed hierarchy of nested 3D grid cells of various sizes, where objects would get inserted into different levels of the fixed hierarchy depending on their size. We can therefore efficiently handle objects of the size of a planet, several thousand kilometers in radius, down to small pebbles just a few centimeters across. Initial performance tests, once it was in the Crusader, have proven the new grid to be vastly more efficient. 10 times less entities returned for small queries, and queries in general faster in the magnitude of 1.2 to 2 times, while using slightly more memory than our legacy system. On the animation front, our lead animation engineer, Ivo Herzeg, has been busy for quite some time. He's been building the core foundation of our AI movement. I want to give you some insight into his progress and give you some examples of what he's been working on. Most of our animations were motion captured, which is a perfect solution for cutscenes and all types of linear animations where things are fixed and predictable. But you can't use mocap data directly for animations that need to be truly interactive, like we'll have for both the player and the AI. To use the mocap data in interactive situations, we must break down the longer motion clips into shorter clips and generate multiple variations of the same motion style. As an example, for a simple walk cycle, we need walking at different speeds, walking in circles, walking on slopes, and walking in different directions such as strafing, etc. A typical AI character in Squadron might have about 1,000 of these small little motion clips. It's impossible to create unique animation clips for every single given situation. That's why we developed a blending technique that we call parametric blending, which enables all these clips to be controlled at runtime. Parametric blending takes the concept of simple animation blending and moves it to the next level. The goal is to make the outcome of the transitions, or an interpolation, predictable for an undefined number of assets. Each motion clip contains a combination of physical and stylistic properties. We call those the natural motion parameters because they're inherently part of the motion itself. To control a character in a game, we want to pass these natural motion parameters to the animation system and let it generate the motion we need itself. Once we have enough animation clips, we put them into what we call a blend space. The most important aspect of a blend space is that each animation clip represents a point in a coordinate system, and all points are connected by an index list. In a blend space, we treat blending as a geometrical problem. The geometrical relationship between the animation clips is extremely important for the blending to work correctly. And the placement of these assets into the blend space is set up so it's fully automatic due to how the animators set up their locators before they export their animations. In a single blend space, we can have more than 100 unique animation clips, and we can control all of them like a single animation. What you see here is an example of a 2D blend space. In this case, we put the travel speed on the X and the turn speed on the Y. We can move the red cursor over the plane, and for each coordinate, we get a blended motion with the correct parameters. This means we can generate all motions between a slow walk and a fast walk while maintaining the correct turn speeds. In this test area, we can move the cursor in any place or direction and always get the correct blended motions back. Here's an example of parametric starts and stops that lead in and out of the walk cycle. You can see how a character starts to walk in the direction we select, and then he walks at different speeds with different turn angles and stops to the left, right foot, left foot, etc. Blend spaces are not only limited to simple motion cycles, they can be used for most AI motions in our vast universe, enabling our AI characters to move fluidly and realistically throughout the entire world. It's great to see Evo's progress, and it's definitely going to have a strong impact on how our AI navigate around the world. The engine team also did improvements to the objects blending with terrain. The underlying terrain and object shapes are now taken into account to blend procedurally distributed objects more naturally with the planetary generated environment. And I hope to show you those improvements soon. The QA team here in Frankfurt grew by one member this past month, James Stevens, our new senior QA tester. He immediately stepped up and took charge of pioneering the testing of the loadout editor. The loadout editor is heavily used by our devs across all 4 locations, so it only made sense for us to increase the depth of testing we do for it on a daily basis. Melissa Estrada also spent some time testing the first version of the Solar System Editor, also known as SolEd. The engineers went over SolEd's functionality. We gathered initial feedback from the team. QA was there, they documented all the feedback, and now they'll work closely with the engineers to find the best way to address each item and how to test it and work with them in the future to get all those resolved. They also supported the engine team with testing of a few separate things, such as updated planet physics grid and refactoring of the texture streamer logic. The AI team this month completed some work on mission-related functionalities for both the PU and Squadron 42 designers. They also worked on improving the setup for complex conversation scenarios where multiple characters need to interact with one another. The first step to achieve this was to allow the subsumption logic to run on top of the players. This allows us to execute some logic on the players on predefined story scenes, but also make sure that the AI system can fully communicate with the player and interact with them. The subsumption tool, which you've heard a lot about, has also had some improvements on the conversation setup and kicked off work on what we call the conversation sub-activities. The sub-activities describe the logic for multiple characters in one view to make it easier for designers to synchronize interactions between the characters and the environment. Under the hood, these conversations will still result in unique sub-activities that will run on different characters so that we can still guarantee that each individual entity can still handle further events and situations on their own. They also completed the first pass on refactoring of the perception for spaceships. We currently have a general perception component on characters that can handle several types of senses. Normal human will obviously have things such as vision and hearing, but once sitting down inside a spaceship, they'll also be able to interface with that spaceship's radar and the group information about the different senses into its perception component. This will now allow us to progress easily towards more character control behaviors on spaceships, since we're removing strict dependencies between the game code and specific behaviors running on the vehicles themselves. Cinematics team, as always, is making steady progress across multiple chapters this month. Some implementing brand new scenes, some they're polishing existing ones. As I previously mentioned, I unfortunately can't show anything specific at the moment without spoiling anything, and they'll all yell at me. In the coming months, though, we're hoping to show you a few bits to really give you an idea on the quality bar that we've set. We've set the bar high for ourselves, and it'd be good to show that off in the work that we're proud of. VFX team here in Frankfurt is continuing working on planetary effects. The systems for implementation have been progressing nicely thanks to the close collaboration between the VFX artists and our engineers here. They started implementing some of the new effects on the planets, including various atmosphere and weather effects, as well as more specific effects for various types of assets that will be distributed with the object scattering system. The Frankfurt environment team has been primarily focused on finalizing the moons. The procedural asset distribution system has seen a lot of progress and is still improving. All the separate pieces that make up our procedural planets and moons are truly starting to fall in place, you could say, and things are looking great. So that wraps us up for Frankfurt. Thank you for all the support that everyone gives us on a daily basis. The team honestly, truly, really appreciates it, and I'll see you again soon.
That look at parametric blending really shows how creating something like walking animation, which sounds really very simple, is actually difficult to do in an interactive universe.
Yes, there is a lot of iteration involved in developing new gaming tools, but it's worth it, especially when you want to create a detailed and realistic final product.
As you may have heard, the 2.6.2 update was released to the PTU. We've been receiving helpful feedback from players, which the team is using to fix as many bugs as possible before it goes live.
And as you probably saw in the forums, the latest patch includes an addition to the Drake interplanetary lineup, the Buccaneer. We decided not to announce the inclusion of the Buccaneer before the Evocati release because we weren't quite sure how the untested ship would fly. Fortunately, the Buccaneer surpassed our expectations. To celebrate, we're having a Drake sale. For the next 10 days, you can get the Buccaneer, Dragonfly, Caterpillar, and more.
Speaking of the Buccaneer, a while back, Sandy Gardner and Forrest Steffen premiered part 1 of the Ship Pipeline featurette. In it, the team followed the ship through the first half of its production pipeline to showcase the process each of our ships takes to become flight ready.
Yeah, and if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend going back and watching that featurette to see how the Buccaneer went from concept art to basic white box model and then back to the ship artist for the Greybox phase.
Well, with the ship flight ready, we can now share the second part of the Ship Pipeline featurette. We're picking up right where we left off with the gray boxing of the Buccaneer completed. Take a look.
Last time we spoke about the white box stage and the gray box stage. Since then, we've moved on to doing the final art stage and what we call flight ready stage.
And that's really where it's just putting the extra polish into the ship, making sure not just that it flies, but that it flies how we want it to. Not just that you can blow it up and that it takes damage, but that it looks fantastic when you do that. It has the right amount of health. Its shields are working and soaking the amount of damage that we're intending them to, and really just putting all the final touches on the ship.
What we essentially do is we finish off the surface of the ship. So we decide what materials any of the geometry is going to be. So if we're going to go with a raw metal or a painted metal, we'll make sure we create all the textures necessary for each material. So, we have wire textures. We'll go ahead and use palms, which is a parallax occlusion mapping texture. It's basically a decal which makes the surface look like it has a lot more detail geometry-wise than it actually does. And we'll use that in order to add rivets to the surface, cut lines onto the wings as an example, where no actual geometry exists. So it looks far more detailed geometry-wise than it actually is, which makes it more efficient to run an engine. It uses less resources, but it looks great. It ends up looking like there's tons of detail on the ship. And it's actually one of our favorite parts to start working on. Once we get to that stage, it really is about detailing it and sort of bringing the ship to life in terms of the way it looks. Because we have a lot of freedom as to how we make these cut lines, start dancing across the ship without actually having to affect the geometry in any significant way. We'll make sure during that stage also to finalize all the animations. So we'll bring in Jay Brushwood in Texas in order to finalize all that, change the timing on the animations if we need to.
Finally get to get my hands in it and get nitty gritty in terms of setting up pivots, the hierarchy structure of the ship. And for those that you don't know, the hierarchy is basically a parent-child relationship. For instance, it's like your hand being a child of your forearm being a child of your upper arm. Same thing deal on the ship. We've got all sorts of hierarchy structures where things can branch out and do their own thing. For instance, with the landing gear, the foot of the landing gear is going to be attached to the ankle of the landing gear. And then we might have pistons that, go in and out of each other and that allow the landing gear to fully retract in. And so anyway, after setting up all that, I get the opportunity to go ahead and work on the timing of the animations. And this is where, you actually add the bit of, flair with overlapping action and a lot of other principles of animation of how things, deploy. And the various parts of the ship that we end up setting up animations for are things like the landing gear, the ladder entry, the canopy opening and closing. All sorts of this stuff needs to be worked out. And then we export that all to game. And once it's exported to game, the next thing we do is we set up the character interactions. And this would be the character climbing in and out of the cockpit, opening up a drawer, opening up a hatch, all the various things.
For me, the whole process is kind of building a puppet that I then get to play with. And the animation part is where it comes to life. And that's where the illusion sort of comes together. This is also the stage when we allow the VFX team to come in and start doing all of their effects for thrusters, as an example.
So the difference between the effects that you'll see on the Buccaneer compared to other Drake ships would be pretty much driven by what that ship looks like and what the function of that ship is compared to the other ships. I suppose the best example is the thrusters. So the color scheme and the style of the thruster effects for the Buccaneer, they're going to be sharing similarities with the other Drake ships. However, the thrusters are a specific shape on that ship, and the thrusters actually animate in a specific way to that ship. So that's going to drive what our effects look like compared to the other ones. So the VFX pipeline itself, we will go to from the R&D to the block out. We then have the first pass, which is the artist's first attempt at getting that effect as kind of good as it can get it, and then that will get reviewed. We will provide feedback from that review, and then it goes into the polish pass. So the polish pass is once that's done and once that's signed off, and it's been optimized as well, because that's a big part of getting the effects finished in the game. Then that's it. Then the effects are done for that ship, and we consider it flight ready.
UI likes to be involved with kind of all milestones of the pipeline from the gray box and the white box. While a lot of the ships use the same UI style, there's definitely quite a few that will require unique screen shapes and sizes. We have a lot of great upcoming ships that have very unique, bespoke designs on them. So the earlier we know about those designs, the quicker we can start working on the visual side of things. But as for the Buccaneer and a lot of other ships, quite a lot of them use the same template system. So UI can be kind of hands-off until the very end. When it came to doing the Buccaneer, thankfully we had a very clean and smooth pipeline introduced already, so plugging the new screens in was instantaneous basically after the 3D modelers came in. There's very few customization that need to be done. Eventually we want to have the Drake ships have their own look and feel, the Anvil ships, everything kind of, while they might have the same screen sizes and screen ratios, we want them to have their own unique colors and feel and different shape language.
Our audio production, Nicola Grelk, takes care of communication between our discipline and the other disciplines. We can see that sort of large ships are coming down the pipeline. We can allocate time to work on those. Smaller ships are going to require less time. So the smaller ships tend to wait until more towards the end before we start working on them. But they all need to have the same amount of emotional connection with the player. So for example, with the Drake craft, we're looking at the lineage, the Herald, the Caterpillar, these other ships, what they sounded like and what they felt like to fly. It's quite different from the Buccaneer. The Buccaneer is far more kind of finessed than, say, the Herald. The Herald's like a can with the rocket strapped to it. I mean, it's like it's going to explode any second, and that's part of its charm, It's sort of agricultural, and this is the feeling we get from it. But we can only really tell that when the ship's got all its decals and detail and stuff in situ, and we can decide what that should sound like. Here's the Herald thrusters for a quick comparison. So you can hear that engine there. It's raw. You're strapped to a rocket. And here's our Buccaneer. That's the Drake sound. Yeah. The thrusters are made up of lots and lots of layers, and here's one of them that gives it a very distinctive tone as we traverse the thrust range here, moving up towards maximum thrust. You hear the sound morphing and changing in character, right up to the top, and then back down again. That's kind of a synth layer in the background, giving it some character. So this synth element is just one element of many that make up the compound thruster sound, but look how many real-time parameters are bound to this single synth sound. All of these here are going to react to the player's input to the ship controls, and they all change the pitch and the filtering and the volume of the various elements, which gives it a very organic feel. As one element rises in tone with a strain on the ship, another electronic buzz might fall in tone in a sympathetic way. And in turn, that provides a very natural interaction within the sounds. And that's exactly how we give the ships more of a voice, a realistic, flexible character. And this extends to even the ambient sounds in the ship as well. They all have these real-time parameters assigned to them. Taking the lineage from the other Drake ships and bringing it across to the new ship is what we're trying to do, but also create something unique in the new ship. It's not like a kit bash. It's not a sort of copy-paste from an old ship to a new ship. It's about taking ideas from those other Drake ships and bringing them across into the new sound design sessions for the Buccaneer, but creating something unique in the process as well.
Then the last stage in the process for us on the art side is the flight ready stage. And during this stage, we are not really focusing on what the ship looks like anymore. We've already sort of finalized that, but we are filling in some of the gaps that are necessary for gameplay to be fully fledged on the ship. So what that means is we need to build damage.
I am involved in every ship in the pipeline. And I jump in about white box stage. After concept's done, the modeling gets laid out, design has put some features in. I'll go in and I'll look at what the design is, what's been done so far, and start to think about destruction. Very early on, we start to think about how the ship will break apart. So we'll talk about how the meshes get divided very early. And in the case of the Buccaneer, Pat handled the damage and the lighting, and I handled some of the optimization work. And what we did for optimization was we do a process called skinning. And it's like rigging a character where you make several meshes, a single mesh, which reduces draw calls, which improves performance. And that also needs to be hooked up through our mannequin animation platform and driven through, say, the thrust of the engine needs to dilate the nozzle of the engine. So I had to hook that up. And the landing gear of the ship needs to deploy and allow you to rest on a platform and have proper collision and materials. And so I handle all that.
When I get the ship from an artist, the first things I do are I start to set it up for detachability. What that usually entails is going to Max and the XML, setting up the variety of components like the wings detaching. And normally in this stage, we're getting this done so design can start to iron out health values and how parts break off and how it affects the flyability of the ship. So before I even get into doing shaders and effects and making it look pretty, just got to get it to work. After I do all the detachments, I set off how the pieces fly off the ship, and those are called vectors. So when you blow off a piece of geo, it's going to spin around, right? And that's based on its pivot point. And then that's going to rotate, and then it's just going to go flying off into space. So I set up how that works. After that, I also go into the XML and I set up pieces that will detach with other pieces. So say, for example, you blow off a big, huge engine on the Buccaneer, right? But there's a wing attached to that. There's also a thruster, and maybe there's a little wing flap behind it. You ask yourself, if the explosion was big enough, would it take off these other pieces surrounding it? So shoot that, and then you can have extra pieces fly off with actual probability. So it's kind of random whether the pieces fly off or not. That's actually just the sort of damage setup phase. I want to get into making sure everything starts to look appropriate when it breaks off. That involves getting ready for shader damage that we've added. We've talked about that, where we have the procedural damage shader, which melts across the surface. For that, we needed to do what's called UV2 setup. And now, if you know, UVs are how your texture gets mapped onto the surface of an object. So in our game, we have two sets of UVs. We have one set of UVs for the basic texture on your surface of your ship, and we have another set of UVs for your damage map to melt and wear across. You're creating like a mesh that closely resembles the shape of the actual ship, and from there, it's kind of trial and error, actually. There's really no tried and true methodology for it, and kind of working it out as we go. Quality gets better as we keep going through, but that's the basic setup. So now what I'm doing is once I get into the editor, I start to shoot the ship, right? And I'm testing and I'm making sure that there's two types of damage happening. There's a decal happening when you shoot. So a bullet hole will leave a burn or a bullet ding, but there's also the shader damage which should happen around it. Now the shader damage works for different weapon types, so laser will leave like a melty wear and a bullet will leave an actual indent that has metal. As you keep shooting, you can tear a hole. As you tear a hole, the modelers have prepped it so that there's internal damage.
Before tech art can implement any of the damage, we have to build it. So we need to actually generate the content that gets revealed in the damage process, the actual setup of it. So we'll do internal damage structure. So this is, like I mentioned before, this is where we build the internal structure for the wings and the body so that there's something there to show. And we will also do an initial pass on what we call the UV2s. Essentially, it's just a second UV channel, which we use to generate procedurally on the fly an alpha map, which then tells the engine where to reveal the damage on the ship.
After I've done the UV2s and I've tweaked it and it looks good and there's lots of melting metal and all sorts of fun stuff going on, I move on to the VFX. Now, there's multiple people working on VFX. I'm doing more preparatory VFX. Since I do the shader damage, there's two parts to it. There's what's called squibs, which are little kind of explosive charges that create shader damage in a radius. I set the radius in max. And then there's actual particles like fire, electricity, smoke, explosions, you name it, right? Now, I don't actually build the particles, but what I do is I go into a library where all the particles are held, and I start to set up all the pieces, and I pick effects, and I put them where I think things are exploding. Are there tubes here? Maybe there should be gas. Is there, something like that. After I set all that up and it looks great, and there's parts flying around and fire, and smoke and stuff, then I send it to the actual particle guys who then do an optimization pass, make sure that I'm using the correct libraries. And the very last final bit is actually making sure that everything detaches correctly. Right, so when a piece blows off, does the gun go flying off with it? Artists will generally do the lights on their ships, so they'll do that as part of the art pass. And then we'll have the components. So if a wing flies off and there's lights on the wing, the light should fly off with the wing. That's part of the setup pass, right? Common sense, but usually there's a bit more setup to it than that. So with lighting, there's two things. We have what's called prefabs for a multi-light, which means that when a player gets in a cockpit seat, it then powers on all the lights around him. Then we have what are called object container lights, which are slightly different. Object containers in new tech, someone else will talk about. But basically, when we have lights in an object container, they're always on. So we use these mainly for more interior, sometimes aesthetic lights that always just need to maybe be on. Anything that needs power fits in a multi-light. I do all that in the ship's setup level. So that's kind of post-phase, but that's the final phase. And from there, it's polish, right? You just shoot it, make sure everything looks good. There's no bad UVs, no parts hanging on, et cetera, et cetera. But for the most part, that's the tech art pass, and then it goes off to all the departments for finalization.
One of the interesting challenges that always pops up as we're finishing off a ship are sort of the random things. It's like, oh crap, I can't believe I forgot that. Or just chasing down why something doesn't work for no reason. One of the more notorious aspects of that is usually our collision. So we're actually just getting the landing gear in. It all functions and looks proper now. But occasionally it doesn't want to act like it's turned on, and so the ship can fall through the ground and just blow itself up for no reason.
Right now I'm chasing up several loose ends. We've got some shader issues, we've got some texture issues. So I'm also chasing up issues with the thruster, not delivering parameterized values to our nozzle correctly, and the glow on the material that's inside the engine. These things will all be solved before the public finally sees it.
And it's just getting those little parts lined up where it's like, okay, do we have to adjust this helper to get that cleaned up? Or do we have to adjust the landing gear itself? And start chasing down almost to which discipline. It's like, okay, this is going to be the cleanest fix for our problem. This is going to be the best fix, almost long-term, for making sure that if we have to do something similar again, it's like, oh, we can refer to this ship because we fix that really clean there this way, and we can apply that to whatever other ship we want to.
So I'm probably the last person to get hands-on with the ship, and that's kind of an overlapping stage where Test and myself have a little back and forth when the ship comes to us, and it's about tweaking and taking what's already been designed for and making sure that that's the way it is in game. The process of balancing it's kind of, you need to be able to see how it's kind of like ranking it in with all the other ships, really. So being able to see how all the other ships compare to each other, that's kind of my job, to make sure that nothing comes in with flight tuning in particular. This ship does not outperform where it should be. It's not too fast, it's not too maneuverable, where it should sit right where it should sit. It's a difficult thing to get right, and it's often a lot of back and forth even now with testers internally and externally, where they point out mistakes or imperfections in the flight model of the ship, the flight tuning of the ship. It's when it comes to weapons, it's kind of the same. You need to make sure that the ship loadout isn't too powerful when it comes to dogfighting against each other. When it comes to finding problems with imbalance, like with weapon loadout, for instance, it's up to me to point that out to the designer in charge of the ship, see if there's any leeway. The Buccaneer being another example of that, with it having a very large loadout for weapons. It hits really hard, it packs a punch. I was concerned about that it may be overstepping its bounds a little bit in terms of the wider balance. So that conversation we had, it's all about the trade-offs. So if we can ensure that that ship is weak, but still hits hard, then that's fine. That's balanced.
I'm really not sure I'm supposed to be talking to you guys about this stuff. We're not really going into all the details of the company right now.
Well, there's something shady happening at Drake Enterprises that you won't want to miss. And that's it for this episode of ATV. We want to thank all the subscribers out there who make this show possible. For the month of April, subscribers can test fly the Gladius Valiant. The Valiant is the first ship to defeat the Vandal in combat.
Sounds like an awesome dogfighter. We're also giving inactive subscribers Big Benny's vending machine flare on April 17th. So, if you've been thinking about becoming a subscriber, join before April 17th to qualify for this deal. Click on the link in the description below for more information.
Of course, Star Citizen exists because of our backers, so thank you again for all your support. Tomorrow, kick off your weekend with Star Citizen Happy Hour at 12 Pacific. Ben Lesnick and Jared Huckby will be playing one of Chris's classic games, Wing Commander Privateer. Ben will also share some little-known history about the game's development.
Thanks for watching, and we'll see you
around the verse.
Thank you for watching. So if you want to keep up with the latest and greatest in Star Citizen and Squadron 42's development, please follow us on our social media channels. See you soon.